All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us again today. We have a continuation of our Success Leaves Clues series, where we are initially looking at presidents of the United States and kind of identifying things that made them successful throughout their life, and obviously specifically during their presidential years. So we're digging a little deeper into Dwight Eisenhower, who I love. He's got a number of quotes, but I love "We the people elect leaders not to rule but to serve." So it gives you a little idea of his approach to maybe life, but certainly politics, and how he entered into that. And then like three different attributes: leadership skills, organization, and strategic skills, along with talent for diplomacy. So we're going to cover all that and hopefully give you some ideas on the entertaining if you have those skills or how you would acquire those skills. But with that, we'll bring Dr. Hall on. Actually, let me introduce him first. Dr. Hall is a business psychologist, executive coach, a multi-time author and public speaker. And we are glad to have him on the show to talk through all of that, along with his knowledge of the presidents. How you doing today, Dr. Hall?
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love this series. I think the combination of your knowledge and my research on the presidents and the skills they have, I just find it very intriguing. Obviously, presidents make sense, but we'll get into future topics of others, athletes and
Sure.
all the other obviously successful people in life. But thanks again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me do just a couple housekeeping items here real quick. For those of you that I haven't met, my name is Jared Lee. I'm the associate broker and team lead here at My Home Connection, also known as MHC Realty. And our sponsor for today, we in large part bring a lot of different tools to real estate business, working with Dr. Hall with business, life coaching, mentoring, and training. But we also bring in the things that you would normally think of in the regards to making for a successful real estate career or entrepreneurial skills. So if you have any questions, would like to know more, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have. But I wanted to ask you, in my research of Dwight Eisenhower, I was looking for something to sum him up, and he didn't, immediately have some of the things, that we see in some of the other presidents we've discussed, like, perseverance. Yes, he lost his son and his brother, so he didn't have it super easy. He didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth. He wasn't the smartest, as best I can tell, person in his class or, person. So I guess what I'm saying is it seemed like solid was kind of the word that I picked up in my research. Would you agree with that, or would you use it different?
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way to describe him. He was, maybe you could say he's an unassuming leader.
Yeah.
I think there were people who were intimidated by him, but he didn't have he wasn't a horseman like Grant. He didn't have the swagger of MacArthur. He didn't have the bullheadedness of Patton. But in many respects, he became their boss as the Supreme Allied Commander because of some of those less dramatic leadership gifts. And I think it's easy to underestimate people because they look kind of like an average guy. And he didn't look remarkable, but he was remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't maybe look remarkable. From what I understand, his speaking skills weren't. I mean, he wasn't, super well known for that.
Right.
He just kept doing the things that he was asked to do well, and he clearly was successful over time. So that's where I kind of came up with a description of
Yeah,
solid.
I think that's a great description of him. But I think the thing I like about your description of him is that I think it gives hope to everyone who doesn't feel exceptional.
That's exactly where I was going with that. When we talk about some presidents, they're very eloquent, they're very charismatic, they're very, intelligent, or, their perseverance was off the chart, or, family had
Yeah,
money or whatever. you know,
Recently, I had somebody describe Obama. I said, what's his central quality? And she said, he's so cool. And so, I mean, Ike was not cool. he,
right,
he didn't
right.
have that.
Yeah. So I mean, I glad you mentioned that because I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I kept thinking is, man, he didn't have all these like just obvious standout skills that somebody would go, yeah, I don't have that. Charisma's not, that's a tough one to,
I mean, if you're Bill Clinton, you got it, right?
yeah.
If you're Barack Obama, you got it. If you're uh, Eisenhower, Calvin Coolidge, you don't got it.
Right, right. So yes, absolutely. To your point, I think everybody can look at Dwight Eisenhower and say, "Man, the guy just did what needed to be done." He, the one thing I will say that I kept hearing is he seemed to really learn from mistakes. Like if there was ever a mistake, he seemed to analyze it and correct very quickly.
Well,
And
isn't that a great encouragement for all of us?
yeah,
That he learned from his mistakes, and one of the qualities of people that I admire is that they're constantly trying to learn. So
yeah,
they're open to believing that there's more to learn. I don't know if I ever shared this with you, Jared, but when I was in graduate school, I went to a very competitive program. So everybody who got in had extremely good grades, high GRE scores. We were all really good at school and reasonably competitive in school. And in my program, I had professors tell me, you're really top of the charts. You're really exceptional, and they told me stuff like that. So when I got out of graduate school, I was insufferable. I mean, I'd spent 5 years being taught how smart I was and how bright I was, and how in the top of the class of a bunch of really exceptional people. And for the first 5 years out of graduate school, I didn't read anything but comics, the Sunday comics in the newspaper. And I was as dumb as I have ever been. And then at one point, somebody told me something that I'd never heard of. And I thought,
uh-oh,
oh man, oh, I'm not that I'm not that smart. I got to get back to studying.
seems like I should know that.
I should know that, and it was kind of embarrassing, but it was really good for me. And I began to read again, and I made it a discipline of mine to constantly be learning. So and that's not because of me. I mean, I had to learn it the hard way by being an idiot. But other people who learn it, who realize, okay, the way I can provide value to other people in the world is to constantly be learning and learning from my mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's a great example from Eisenhower.
Yeah, and I liked also the fact that he never was kind of at the top of his class per se, but he knew what he liked and what he could get good at. And from what I understand, being at West Point, looking at history and English, like he just gravitated towards that. So, he would see the mistakes of the past or what have you, and incorporate it into his career.
Well, and that's another thing that, if you think about it, at West Point, he's 18 to 22. I mean, he's really young.
Yeah,
To have that self-awareness, to have that knowledge of yourself is pretty unusual. To know, okay, this is what I like, this is what I'm good at, here's what I should focus on. I think most of us, when we're 18 to 22, we're just looking to, chase people we're attracted to. I mean, we're not really thinking about how am I uniquely put together, and that doesn't come till later. So I think for Eisenhower, that's a competitive advantage.
yeah, yeah. This was I don't quite know how this will tie in, but I thought it was super interesting. I guess him and his brother graduated from high school at the same time, but their family couldn't afford to send two kids to college. So they agreed that he would stay and work while his brother went off to college, and then they would, you know, he would reciprocate when he got
Right.
out of college. But then when he heard, that there was some options to go to military school and get college paid for.
Right.
I thought that was interesting that he. I mean, I don't know how all that translated, but clearly whether he lost or he gave it up, I don't know. But he put his brother first. But it ended up working really well for him.
It's a little like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I don't know if you remember that part of the story.
Oh, yeah.
He stays home so his brother can go to college.
Yeah.
And so that was not uncommon then, and it may not be uncommon these days as well. And the service academies provide a great opportunity for young people with gifts and skills who are willing to serve their country to get a government expense paid education.
Yeah. Well, let's pull up kind of the three that we broke down, and I'd asked you right before we got started with the episode, if he was a natural leader or kind of grew into leadership. I don't know that we really know, but clearly he got good at it.
Yeah, he did get good at it, and it's fun to do these psychological autopsies to look at people after they're gone to figure out what put them together. Was it some of the childhood adversities? Was it growing up in modest means? We don't know. But he became very, very good at interacting with people, and it seems like he just kept rising. He just kept advancing. He wasn't exceptional. He wasn't particularly good looking, but he had enough of what it took to succeed.
Pull it all together.
And again, it's hopeful for the everyman, right, or the every woman, that you don't have to be you don't have to be larger than life to gravitate to positions of responsibility and leadership.
Yeah. Well, I'm certain that West Point, I mean, not having gone there myself, but I got to think, West Point teaches you leadership. So I'm sure, whatever wasn't natural got taught there. But as I understand it, he got hurt fairly early on in his football career and then ended up coaching. So coaching, better figure out leadership there.
Yeah, because if you're coaching, you essentially become a teacher and a trainer of other people, and that is a proving ground for leadership. Learning how to understand how other people learn and grow and how they can improve their performance requires you to take their perspective. So if we look at some of those skills, the first is the ability to be aware of yourself and control yourself. Then it's how do you be aware of other people and what their motivations are, and then how do you learn to persuade those people? One of the kind of mantras of my work is I train leaders to monitor and manage their thinking. So self-awareness, self-control. How do they become aware of what they're all about, what their purpose is, what their gifts are, what's the content of their thought, and then how do they control those things? And the second part is the stuff he got from coaching, which is how do you then monitor and manage the thoughts and emotions of others? So empathy, the ability to accurately guess what other people are thinking and feeling. And then the last one is influence. How do you manage the thoughts and emotions of other people? And he got all those things at a relatively young age. All of those things helped him become a better leader. Those are some of the building blocks of great leadership.
Yeah. So take those trials and learn from them. He could have just abandoned football altogether. My knee's shot. I can't play anymore. I'm done. Instead, hey, how else could I stay in the game? And by the way, becoming a coach, right? I mean, to your point, when you coach people, you're quite often learning as much, in some cases more, than your players or your students.
I was listening to somebody just earlier today say, I was teaching this thing to these people, I taught them in December, and now it's like it's brand new. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, because you're the teacher, you're the one who
Yeah.
knows it. The teacher always knows the material better. If you want to learn something to the point of mastery, learn it so that you have to teach others.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you might be able to master something not having taught others, but I can pretty much guarantee you you'll be much more likely by teaching others because you just, yeah.
You will. And I mean, there's an aphorism that says you're really not an expert in your field until you can teach it to a third grader.
Mm, love it.
Whatever your area of expertise is, if you can't explain it to a third grader, you really don't know the material.
Yeah, love it. Love it. So we could, theorize on the leadership side of things, probably ad nauseum if we wanted to, but clearly with the things he accomplished, over time with the war, Cold War, and president being, two-term president. I mean, he clearly become a very good leader.
Well, yeah, long before he became president, he was a remarkable leader. I think if you look at his history, he was frustrated in the military. Some of his peers were been given combat commands, and he kept being withheld. Patton went to Europe, and MacArthur went to Asia or the Pacific theater for the war, and Eisenhower stayed home, and he was pretty frustrated about it because he wanted to get in the mix, and it was just because he was such a good trainer, such a good leader, and he could think things through and explain them, and as you mentioned before we got on camera, he was part of the mastermind of the D-Day invasion. And how do you plan it so that it's during a dark night, so it's during a new moon? How do you do it so that the tides are just right? How do you do it so that the weather is likely to be right? How do you plan all of these different factors? How do you send wrong signals into Europe so that they think you're going to go to a different place? You're going to go to Calais. And how do you plan for the infiltration of the paratroopers ahead of time so that they can be fighting a rearguard battle with the Germans? How do you set up the special operations people to sabotage the trains? I don't know if you knew this or not, but they sent saboteurs in to put grease that was impregnated with grit onto the train wheels so that they would grind and wouldn't be able to go as fast. So I mean, there were thousands of different things that had to all be integrated for this one day, and if it hadn't succeeded, I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah, in my research, I was in awe of the amount of things, the fake, you know, how did
The
you say?
inflatable tanks.
Yeah, like they faked this attack here and this attack here, and they dropped like metal out of parachutes on the plane to, to confuse their radar and all the
Yep.
things you mentioned. It was just kind of nuts that he put all that together. And actually, I found it interesting. I didn't realize because of the war, what did they call the group? There were so many of them out of West Point because of the war that ultimately ended up in high leadership positions of the war. They call them like the falling stars or something. There was like a third of the class, his West Point class, ultimately ended up being, generals and, anyway, I thought it was pretty interesting. But you're right. He was the one held back going, wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, all these other guys are getting combat positions and getting to do all the really cool stuff, but he was really remarkably good at all of that strategy. I mean, if you think about it, they had to assemble floating concrete pylons to create artificial docks. I don't know if you knew this or not, but once they landed on those and took the beachhead, then the next day they brought in concrete piers that floated. And as soon as they got them there, they opened up the valves, filled them with water, and they sunk. And they created places that they could dock. So if you think about the amount of material, the amount of people, the amount of intelligence, I mean, they masked all of this in England, all the while not letting them know everything that they were planning. It's a remarkable a remarkable organizational feat to bring all that together. And of course, he didn't do it alone,
Right.
but he oversaw all of it
Yeah.
because he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces.
Yeah. Well, I guess he did it. I mean, obviously he was successful, but he did it to the point where upon his return, everybody wanted to run for, office for president. And he, didn't see himself in that, political role. So he kind of poo-pooed it, but to come back and have people clamoring to have you run as president, I mean, that says a lot, right? He's super popular.
Well, he was super popular, partly because he's very approachable. MacArthur was a lot more flamboyant, but MacArthur was not very likable as a person. People kind of detested him. He had a dust up with Harry Truman. So, and this was during the war. Harry Truman and MacArthur were circling an airport, and MacArthur wanted Truman to have to wait for him. So he refused to land his plane first.
Oh my goodness.
And Truman said to MacArthur, he said, "You can disrespect me as a person, but you will never again disrespect the office of the president of the United States."
Wow.
And that just wasn't Eisenhower's way of interacting. He kept, for the most part, kept his nose clean, did the right things, was responsible, and his competence was the proof of his ability, not his swagger.
Yeah. Well, and it seemed like his competence wasn't, as best I could tell, wasn't something that he constantly had to sell or pitch. People saw it in him and wanted him in certain positions because of the degree of his competency. Did I get that sense correctly?
Yeah. I mean, we've all met that person, right? We've all worked with that person who doesn't draw attention to themselves, but you always want them on your team because they're so good at what they do.
Yeah.
There's a Bible verse. Do you see a man skilled at his work? He will not serve before obscure men. He will serve before kings. And it's a proverb that essentially says, if you're really good at what you do, the best of the best in the country will want you on their team because they'll see how good you are at what you do. And I think he's an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's I'm trying to remember. So I think we talked about this a little bit already, but how is it that you take these big personalities and get them to, do the things that need to get done?
Yeah, so I mean, look at who he had to deal with. I mean, Churchill, who I respect the heck out of, was no easy person to manage. I mean, he was usually, a bottle of champagne and a few glasses of whiskey into the day by the time lunchtime came around, and he was larger than life. He was hard to deal with, eminently self-confident. Fortunately, he did have competence. But then you have de Gaulle, and you have you have de Gaulle, who was the general who folded like a cheap card table with the Germans, and he wanted to be in charge. I mean, okay, wait a minute. Let's look at this. Yeah, you didn't do real well here. You retreated, and now you want to be in charge. So he had to deal with that giant ego. Then there's Montgomery, who was the chief general for the British, and he was absolutely sure he was the brilliant strategy person. From what little I know, it seems like Montgomery would choose the battles he was most likely to win and give the ones that he wasn't likely to win to other allies, namely the Poles. The Polish allies just had all the worst jobs. And so you've got MacArthur, you've got Patton, you've got Montgomery, you've got de Gaulle, you've got Churchill, he's got and then FDR, he's got Roosevelt. I mean, these are ginormous egos. And then he had to cooperate with the Soviets, and Stalin, he has had as big an ego as anybody else, and yet he had this ability to feed all of their egos and get them to do what he wanted because he was in charge of all of it. And he was successful because it wasn't about him. There's a quote attributed to him that says, "It's amazing how much you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit." And I think that's a great way to describe his approach to leadership. Is he was perfectly willing for these larger than life characters to get the credit so long as the job got done.
Yeah, I never in any of my research got the impression like he was vying for credit of anything. I mean, he just kind of just did what needed to be done and did it well. And to the
do
point,
your job.
Yeah. I mean, Supreme Commander of NATO and the President of the United States 2 terms. And then, I mean, he was not a spring chicken when he became president, but he did all kinds of things while he was president. I mean, it was wild.
Right.
He just kept doing it.
I think we can argue that, his tax policy was regressive and was hard on business in the 1950s, but there was a sense of stability in the country. Everyone was delighted that they weren't at war, even though Korea was going on. They were delighted that they didn't have to deal with the same kinds of problems they had to deal with in World War II. So many people call the 50s the era of good feelings because everything seemed stable. The GIs came home, they built a bunch of houses, they all had places to live, they got married, they had their kids, and life went on. And he was largely responsible for creating that sense, that emotional feel in the country that there was calm and stability.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of more examples of him just doing what he felt like was the absolute right thing to do, because he was getting a lot of pressure. Was it Roosevelt that was trying to convince him to run as president for the Democrat Party, and he eventually went with the GOP?
Roosevelt had died in his last term. So Truman was the president after that, and Truman may have wanted him as a Democrat because he was also a Democrat.
Yeah, and it sounds like he, just decided, all that pressure aside, I'm going to do what I feel is right, and at the expense of damaging that relationship. Anyway, and that was probably the only specific example I could think of, but my guess is that was just a common thread for him as, I'm going to do what I know and do it as best I can.
Yeah, and I think to go against the popular sentiment of the time for what his convictions told, which is, his farewell address is quite famous for saying that we need to beware of the military-industrial complex. Now, we hear that phrase all the time by people who are anti-military and anti-war. Well, here's a guy who was the supreme Allied commander who was the first person to say that and to warn the country against an overarching relationship between the military and commerce. Yeah. And I think his words were prescient, that prior to World War II, we did not have, the kinds of military buildup that we have now. And while it has its advantages, there are also tremendous disadvantages. Yeah. I guess one other thing is that he was important in instituting the Marshall Plan for Europe. And I don't know if you know about that, but General Marshall was the general whose job it was to rebuild Europe. The place was bombed to hell. Yeah. And so how do you divide up Europe, which was done imperfectly? um, but the United States really funded that rebuilding, and then NATO was created to protect Western Europe from predations from the Soviet Union. And so there was an awful lot that went on there that led to the protection of all of Western Europe under the watchful eye of the United States. And if people don't know their history, the U.S. had military bases throughout Europe for decades, and still does have bases in Europe. But the many of the roads in Europe were created so that they could hold tank traffic, U.S. tank traffic.
Wow.
They were designed for that. And so much of the planning of what happened in Europe post-war was, how do we continue to defend Europe from the potential invasion from the Soviet Union, which was the Cold War threat. And he was there for the start of that.
Yeah, yeah. I was just in awe of how much he accomplished, but without anything immediately jumping out at you, like the interstate road system here in America, and all that.
If you think about it, prior to Eisenhower, the interstates didn't exist.
Right.
And I'm old enough to remember when in my single digit years, when I was a little kid, there weren't interstate highways connecting everything. And now we just take them for granted. They just didn't exist. It took forever to get across country.
Yeah. Yeah. Not only was it a big undertaking, but it was well done. I mean, it's very well thought out.
For its era, it was extremely well executed. But then again, that was what he was good at, and he was good at delegating authority to highly competent people who would take it and run with it, because he didn't really care about getting the credit.
Yeah, and all the positives that came out of that decades later of having the road system, the transportation system, and I mean,
we just take it for granted.
Yeah.
We absolutely take it for granted. It didn't exist in my lifetime.
Well, here was an interesting thing that I found is, initially those roads were, because of nuclear concerns, was to how do you get people out of the big cities into more rural areas. But clearly he had a holistic view of, yes, we're going to give you a way out of the city, but we need to connect them, and we should connect them in a logical, intelligent way, not just, hey, we're going to get you out 10, 20, 40, 50 miles or whatever. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the furthest north horizontal is 90, then there's 80, 70, 60, down
even numbers
to the 10. Yeah. And then, the verticals are
odd numbers.
Odd numbers.
Yeah.
So they whatever the north south, it's something one instead of 80, it's 81, instead of 90, it's 91. So all of those were well thought out, and if you look at a simplified map, it makes sense. It's not an exact grid. It kind of gets mixed up in the middle of the country, but generally it
works well.
It works out really well. I mean, those Rocky Mountains are pretty tough to contend with.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's make sure we address that, and not just because it's going to be difficult, leave it out of our plan.
Right.
Let's just make it happen. Yeah. The West, specifically the Northwest, there's a lot to overcome there. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, drilling all those tunnels. So there was a tremendous amount of work that they did.
Yeah.
Because of his guidance and support on that planning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's the two. The one major takeaway, I'll go full circle back to that, is, for those of you that think you're missing some big, huge, enormous attribute to your personality or skill, that you'd never be a leader to that level. Here's evidence of a man that just kept doing what needed to be done and did it well. So I encourage you.
He was competent at what he did. He was great at getting other people to do their best, and he had humility. He didn't really care about who got the credit.
Yeah, I love all of that. So I was kind of wondering how the research would play out and what I would think, but as I was digging into it, I was like, wow, this is pretty impressive. So
Yeah, yeah, he was an impressive human being, and we were lucky to have him as a president.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's wrap things up. We are past our 30-minute mark here, but I do want to make sure everybody knows how to get in touch with you and what resources you have available to them.
Yeah, if you want to find out more about me, go to my website, drrogerhall.com, drrogerhall.com. There you can find an online course called Freak Out. And if you have difficulty with anxiety, this course can help you manage and overcome that anxiety so that you can lead a more productive life. You can find out about my books. The one that I'm writing now is called DIY Leader Brain. And from the website, you can find my award-winning book, DIY Brain, Staying Happy, Being Productive, and Expedition. And a new edition of that is coming out here in the next few weeks. So I'm really excited about that.
Social media?
If you want to follow me on social media, I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, Rumble, all of the channels at Dr. Roger Hall. And my podcast is called Second Thoughts with Roger Hall.
Love it. Love it. Well, thanks again for jumping on and your wisdom and knowledge and access to resources. We certainly appreciate you being on these episodes. It's a great time, and I hope our listeners get a lot of value out of it.
And thanks for having me, Jared. It's great that we're working together on this project.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Other than that, we'll wish everybody a blessed one. Take care.